WV Uncommon Place. This podcast is a variety podcast that houses numerous series to cover mental health, empowerment, podcast framework, and various intimate theories to get to know the hosts, along with occasional movies reviews and dives in pop culture with our event podcast episode. The Uncommon Place digs into bringing guests on that stories don't fit the mold and are very different. WV stands for the great state of West Virginia, and every quarter we cover something in West Virginia. Stacy and myself, JR, are your hosts, so please come along for this venture to our Uncommon Place.
Hi, everybody. My name is J.R. Sparrow. The British lady already told you that, but here's the thing I got for you. Imagine you start off in life and you start down a path, you get a career. This career that you go down, you get many disciplines inside this. So let's take, for instance, you could be a physician, you could be a steel worker, you could be anything of any sorts, right? Imagine, though, at the end of the day, you like when you're about ready to retire or it's time to decide what's next for you, the fulfillment puts you in a different direction. Well, my guest today, he's gone through tons of clinical trials and eventually he decided that it was time to become an author. And with him becoming an author, that transcends like generations. It transcends, and when I say generations, generations, of his life, or generations like of jobs. Because when you change from one job, you go to an input, you become an input, and then going further into this man has decided to tell you a story. And when he's telling you this story, you're going to get intrigued. And just hearing about him before you hear that he became an author, you're going to be intrigued with that story. I'm intrigued to get to hear that. And the lives that he's touched, we're going to find out today if they influence what he wrote about. Now, before we go any further, I would like to introduce to you all PK Edgewell.
Thanks, JR. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Now, you know about the show. So this wouldn't be a surprise to you. Could you please tell me about a time in your life that you learned something from someone other than a parent?
Sure. I think, one of my earliest learning experiences came from a grandmother. My father's mother developed glaucoma in midlife, and by the time I was born, she was blind. And I don't remember exactly if she ever saw me, but I don't think she did. And so after she became blind, she lived alone, and we would visit her regularly. And she was so grateful for any company. And I got to watch her move about her house, feeling her way around, shuffling around, and taking care of everything, taking care of herself, cooking. She had an old upright piano that she still played, and she would sing along. And I was just fascinated by her. And with her handicap, she lived a full life within her space. And I didn't know the word resilient at that time in my life,
Right?
but I was amazed at what she did. And I mean, she could no longer see a candle lit in front of her. And but she read Braille. She would sit there and tell us a story from Braille. And it gave me an inspiration. It gave me courage to think, you can get through some pretty hard stuff. I couldn't at that time imagine anything worse than being blind. And but she taught me that, probably no barrier you can't break your way through. So that's a lesson that I learned from someone other than my parents.
Okay. Resiliency and tenacity. Now, one thing that I like for all of our video people that are going to see this or viewers, you're going to see a smile one on his face, a smile that showed what I've been trying to accomplish this year with the show, that someone outside of your parents can be a guidance and lead you into a certain characteristic that you sometimes forget about. And just in that moment right there, PK just he smiled and he you reminisced about everything. And that's an amazing thing there. Now, tell us about your upbringing and how you got to adulthood.
Wow, that's how long do you have here?
We got time.
So, I Bill Cosby, I started out as a child. So, um, I grew up in a Catholic family, big Catholic family. We had 6 children. My parents had 6 children. Um, Grew up in a small household. We were all crammed into a couple of bedrooms. And so we were very close knit. My couple of things that happened to a lot of the children. My father tried to enlist in the Army 3 times during World War II and was rejected for, I think, flat feet or something like that. And he had a lot of regrets about that. So he encouraged his offspring to go into military service to the country. So all 6 of us did. And my parents were full of faith, and 4 of us children tried out religious life. My one sister went into the convent for a time, and 3 of us tried out the seminary. None of us stayed in religious life, but that was kind of the background we had growing up. So along the way, after I got out of 8th grade, I went into the seminary for a time. And after I graduated high school, I went to United States Air Force Academy for my military service. And after that, I got interested in medicine. I was a respiratory therapist in a hospital intensive care unit environment for a number of years. And then I got into medical school. And somewhere along that way, I became an adult. So I spent 40 years in medicine. And yeah, at the end of it, I don't want to jump ahead of your questions, but you know, during that time, I didn't read much fiction. When I had time to read, I had my nose into medical literature to keep up on my specialty, to keep up on practice management, global health, global economy. And so when I wanted to get away and disconnect, I wanted to get away from print on a page or on a screen. And that's when I went to performing artists, actors, on screen or stage to make things come alive for me. I just want to disconnect with print. So that's what I did for entertainment rather than read fiction. But late in my career, when I was planning retirement, I sort of reflected on what had made my career feel so full, so rewarding. And it was just watching ordinary people facing very difficult situations, difficult diseases, changes in their life, changes in their work environment. And I saw so much courage in ordinary people as they confronted their challenges. And I thought most of them had more courage than I did. I wondered if I could get through their challenges with as much grace. And I thought, I've got some stories to tell about human beings and their resilience and I was just fascinated by the subject. So I just thought I would do that. And so last year I published this novel. It's about 5 years after retirement from the full practice of medicine. So that's how I made the transition.
Okay. That's amazing there. 40 years in medicine. That's a long time. So
It
you've
is.
seen medicine, like you've seen it, you've seen the innovation. And that's a crazy thing because thinking back, when people conceptually think 40 years, they don't understand 40 years could technically be 50 years because you knew how medicine was at a state at that time when you started, and medicine was different even before that, 10 years before that. The
Yeah.
medicine you grew up with as a child, when you actually started working, it wasn't even the same then.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing that's always evolving. Now, 4 decades inside of medicine and the clinical trials, you end your career. Like you said, you could have done anything you wanted to. You could be parasailing anywhere in the world right now or doing anything. And through retirement, your eyes get open because you have father time with you. You can go on and you can decide like, hey, I can do this, I can do that, or I can just sit here in the stillness and have a peace that I may not have normally had. And audience, when I'm talking about peace, I'm talking about quietness. Um, a little bit of that delivery that you don't get in your life in medicine because you were always on call. No matter when you were asleep, you were always destined to help and to nurture. So, what drove you? Like, what inside your soul beyond not doing fiction or having a part of fiction writing in your life? What made an author become what you wanted it to do instead of maybe like a philanthropist for a certain specialty in healthcare?
I think I was trying to make life easy, and you know, trying to write or writing is so flexible, and I have a great advantage. I had a full career um, that made my living, and I'm writing in retirement, so I can write anywhere, anytime. I have no limitations of having to make a living from it. So that's incredibly liberating. And the the performance of this type of art form, you can sit and close your eyes anywhere and imagine the story you want to tell. You can um, put yourself in a room with the characters that you've created. You can create the dialogue. You can guide the direction, uh, all from the inside of your head. And you have the freedom to create whatever you want. You're not stuck with the scientific facts, the lab data, the imaging results. You've broken free from that, and you can create the story you want to tell. Now, I will admit, in this, my first novel, and in the second novel that I'm working on now, the story tends to have um, moral and human messages in it that I'd like to convey. And whether that comes from being in seminary or being a physician or whatever, being in um, clinical research, I just sort of have the opportunity to draw from all those experiences. My medical career was grounded in the United States, but I had the opportunity to go to many other developing countries and see patients in those environments. And there's a lot of difference, but it teaches you so much about our species, not just one's own race, not just one's own nationality, but our species in general. And I've been asked a lot of time, what's the main lesson that you learned in practicing in developing countries overseas? And what slapped me in the face was it made me proud to be of the human race. You see folks that have normal, happy lives They are so resource deprived compared to the life we live. And I learned this on my first excursion in the jungles of Brazil. And I had a Japanese American along with me at that time. He says, I want to point out something to you, young man. And I was young then. Um, said, don't ever think that you're happier than these people. They live in the middle of a river on a tiny island on stilts, their house is on stilts, and they really have to struggle to get their next meal. But you look at them, they're into their families, particularly. They have love, they fall in love, they enjoy life, they play, they make jokes, they laugh at you, and so don't make the mistake of thinking you're happier because you have more stuff, more cargo, as some tribes call it. And seeing people thrive in what I would consider challenging situations just made me so proud to be a human being. And so if you just write from that perspective, it gives you hope. And I've had a lot of opportunity to gather hope along the way.
Right. And I like that. And one thing I want to circle back to real quick, one thing I like that you talked about is not staying in the conformity of a linear expression. And this quality that you just told us about the actual human nature and the human process. I like that because a lot of people are very subjective on how they are about things. And your perspective, that really is amazing to think about that because uh, I know tying it even into America, I've seen people in my travels because the company that I work for, I travel all over the United States. Like you said, it's crazy. The minimalistics or the people with less always seem more happier than those with the most. Uh,
Yeah.
and I can even, I mean, you probably could both attest to this. I know career wise, was never worried about that, but I remember where I started from to where I am now. And I remember the smaller things that I did that made me happy that I don't even think about. So thank you for that because you just gave me a moment. I'm gonna have to go do a personal episode about that later on. So thank you there. Now, here we go. We haven't talked about you as the doctor. As a doctor, you were a top doctor in Phoenix Magazine for consecutive years, which is rare. Your clinical work and volunteering, Vietnam, Guatemala, Brazil, Ethiopia. And you told us about what the international experiences have brought you. But what did they bring you in practice when you came back to America? Did you go over there and then come back here and practice right after that? Or did you take a little time off? Like, what did you, like the things that you learned, how did you incorporate that into America? Kind of in a way, not to assimilate someone from here, but to kind of give them your perspective. How did you do that as a doctor?
You know, JR, you just asked the wrong question because I actually did a PhD thesis on that subject. So let me just quickly orient it.
Okay.
Um, so when people think about um, working overseas as a physician, they usually think of the big one, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders,
Mm-hmm.
or Doctors of the World. Those are the two biggies that people think of. And those are one way to go about having experiences in developing countries or having experience in conflict areas or disaster areas. But those are full-time physicians. Are, they do better in that environment, frankly, than they do in an organized practice that's stationary. It's a different mindset. But then there's a bigger activity going on that most people don't know about. And by various names, these are short-term medical missions, and they're made up of physicians from the United States, Canada, UK, Taiwan, um, where they go for physicians go on excursions that last in terms of weeks, not years. And so they're seeing patients, they're teaching, modern technique to physicians in that area. They're working alongside. So there's a lot that goes on there. And in that environment, the idea is there's an exchange. So we bring what we have that they need, they value as practicing physicians with their patients. And what, say, American physicians get from that exercise is the experience of getting back to basic medicine. Um, when you go and you come back over and over, each time you go, you feel renewed when you return because you get back to basics. You get away from, a technology-filled world to more basics, where you have to do your manual skills. You have to know how to ask the right questions to get to the diagnosis and do a good physical examination to get to the diagnosis. And it renews your spirit in what you trained to do, to help someone with the basic skills that you've learned. And then whatever, grab whatever technology is available and implement that as best you can. It just renews physicians. So it's an exchange. There's a tacit bargain going on. Most people are like, oh, that's so nice of you to go and do this. And yeah, you're trying to bring what you can bring, but you really get so much back from it in terms of reorientation, getting away from all the spin of, churning technology, churning electronic medical records, payment systems and all that. Just put all that aside and just get back to basic medicine. And it's a wonderful experience.
Okay, and I like that because the way you worded it, I'm glad that you didn't word it the way I thought you were. Like basically, we'll go back to not primitive, but you'll go back to the general standard of medicine. That's what you went back to, and bringing that back with you. You know how to make medicine, like you can count a grain, right? In medicine, right? So that's amazing there, and that doesn't tell anybody anything. Anyone, please don't ask if I was an LPN in another life. We won't talk about that. But learn so pharmacology, and just everything you have to do over there. All your senses go back. What made you want to become a doctor?
Exactly.
And I can appreciate that. So, any young aspiring physician or anyone in medical school right now, please take this moment in this episode to take that as a marker. Hopefully, Apple will keep that as a chapter. Hopefully, that's like a highlight right there. So I hope that stays there. Now, we got to do something real quick, and it's nostalgic to the WB Uncommon Conversations podcast. It's called The Shameless Plug, where you tell people they can meet and greet you across the internet or snail mail, which I don't advise that unless you got a PO box. But please take the time, PK, and let the audience know where they can meet and greet you.
So I just finished putting up a website called pkedgewater.com. Very, very simple. You can go and read about this novel. You can read about my background, and you can send me an email through that. And if you have a question, I'd be happy to respond.
All right. Now, another thing I would need to know real quick, what is the best way to get this book? How do you feel it could be fully optimized? Where do you want them to get this book from?
Well, you can get it from your library. They can order it from Ingram Spark. You can get it from Barnes& and Noble online. You can get it from Amazon online. And I just learned a very important thing from J.R. Sparrow right now about how to get one's novel into the public libraries in your state. So I'm going to take advantage of that.
Okay. Now, I got a question. Now, what if someone wants an autographed book from you? Because being a first-time author and you are working on a second novel, in doing so, the first book is always that's the empathy. That's the one that started everything. So how do they get an autographed copy from you? How do they get that directly?
Ask and we'll negotiate how to get it to you.
Okay, and I like that answer there. Now, in writing a book, um, you take pieces of you and put that in there. Your time in the Air Force was near the Vietnam War.
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned there was six siblings in my family,
Hmm.
and there's sort of an arc there. My sister was the oldest, my one sister, and there were five boys. My sister, not long after high school graduation, she just wanted to have an adventure. She joined the Marine Corps, and
Whoa.
yeah, and that's when we were in Vietnam only as advisors. So, she didn't see any combat. Um, my eldest brother was getting in trouble at school and at home, and um, so he dropped out of high school and joined the Navy. And then after him, the next three brothers, I'm the youngest, the next three brothers followed him into the Navy after graduation. And that was in the mid 60s when the Vietnam War was ramping up and becoming more controversial with the mounting casualties. Um, when I graduated high school, I got a break. I was recruited by the wrestling coach um, at the Air Force Academy. And that was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And during my first 2 years of officer training, that's when we were withdrawing from Vietnam, and the withdrawal ended up in this very sort of messy extraction of forces. And so the arc of my siblings and I brought back to our household, a rich um, discussion about phases of war and what happens to people um, from combat, and what happens being associated with that. I never saw combat. I didn't. The Vietnam War went cold by the time I would have served in combat. Um, but the experiences lasted with me because just like my brothers all experienced, um, when I went into town from base in my uniform as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, I would get, um, cat calls just because I was in uniform. And so that was surprising. And for my contemporaries, it's kind of a strange world. That's way behind us now. You don't see that in this country nowadays. We learned a lesson about um, how to treat your contemporaries who are just trying to do their duty when it comes to our national defense. Um, so we could talk about that a lot, but I think that's enough said.
Okay. Now, I do want to ask you this. Now, you get out of the military, you're treating veterans. Um, and I have personally seen in the state of West Virginia how the VA runs and different things because of a profession I was in. Um, and I have a question. How is treating a veteran different than treating, a normal, not a normal, but a non-military patient? Because there's a lot that goes on. And with your family, you all have a lineage that's the Vietnam War. So you've dealt with the beginning, the middle, and the end of the war, which was you. And so you have a grasp on the mentality because you learned it, and each brother and sister came back different. When they left, they were someone that you knew. When they came back, they were someone you had to get to know. So with these veterans, maybe you didn't know necessarily all of them or any of them when you were treating them, but when they come back, I've always felt like there's a certain level of displacement when they come back. And if you're not, and I hate to say this, if you're not of that same grain, you don't completely understand. You have empathy for it, but you completely don't understand what it's like because you were something over there. You come back here, and it's almost like when you return here, it's like an augmented reality.
Yeah. So yeah, I could say a couple of things about that. You know, I hate to say it's a different culture, but in any definition of culture, you would probably have to include veterans versus people who were never in the service, whether they saw combat or not. It does create a mindset. It readjusts you to a mindset that is not part of your natural background. Um, so when I treated veterans, I worked in a veterans hospital for a brief time. I was mostly in private practice, and that's where I saw most of the veterans outside the VA system. Um, Particularly combat vets, but anyone who had done a tour of duty did have that reservation that you picked up on uh, through the training, through being in conflict, kinetic conflict, and the return from that, or being shuffled around in the political vibes of that time. It affects you, and um, the reason there's some hesitancy to talk to just anyone about your military time is because you understand that there is this sort of invisible separation of having that experience versus not having that experience. I think it's I think it's being peeled away more and more as we uh, look at the psycho-emotional changes of being in the military more deeply and talking about it more. Um, but it's a cultural difference.
Yeah.
Combat vets can talk to it more directly. And I had combat vets in my family, even though I wasn't a combat vet. And the focus that you have to take on in that environment is very special. It seems kind of crude, but you can compare it to elite athletes that perform at an incredibly high level that requires pure focus. You have to be entirely present, entirely conscious to stay alive, let alone do your mission. And it's that type of peak experience that we're putting so many young people and middle-aged people into that can't help but shape your view of the world. And if you haven't been in that sort of peak experience, you miss a lot of what that experience does to people and what it means to people.
Okay, so sort of like being very disciplined, like a national Wadu Ryu karate champion, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And I can see that. Now me, sadly, the closest that I've gotten that makes sense now. You play video games professionally. It's not
yeah.
the same, but
No, but you're concentrated.
yeah, I'm
You got to be
concentrated to
present.
the point where I know when to turn certain switches on, when to turn them off. Literally inside my head, I'm playing against a kid. I'm playing against somebody competitively for a lot of money, or I'm playing against somebody for ranking. I mean, totally different stuff, but the mindset. The,
Yeah, you're exactly right. The neural process is the same.
Right. So yeah, I can get that. So you have to be real well structured too. And coming back to a place that could be built sloppy or a place not sloppy is not the right word. Place that is inadequate for structure and function.
More relaxed.
Yes. That could throw you off.
Yeah.
Okay. I can see that. Now, you write a story, a chance encounter with a Vietnam veteran and a young psychiatrist. What drew you to this kind of opening moment as the emotional anchor for this narrative?
So, as I mentioned, when I planned on retiring and thought about what I would do, I would write fiction that tells stories about ordinary folk and you know, some examples of their reactions and manners of dealing with the challenges that they didn't ask for, but they got. And so for the first novel, I really honed in on my family's experience in the military as a useful background. Um, so that's where it took off from. And the story is about, um, so you can imagine the police dragging this aging, drunk Vietnam vet into a big public hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. And therein he's matched up with this young psychiatrist in training who's from a different country. And through their interactions, you learn many of the rites of passage that each of these characters has had to get through to get to this moment in time of their interaction. Um, what their training was like, and what it is still like. Um, and you also learn about, why the vet had but a single round in his weapon when he was arrested.
Okay.
So, so with my background in medicine and having served at the time of my siblings, I wrote a story that sort of uh, drags the reader backwards through the hedge. That's an old Irish expression. To make them look at these types of transitions, to make them look at trauma and healing and relationships, um, and sort of force people to think about their own transitions.
Okay.
And I think some people will thank me for it.
Now, everybody knows my current situation. I am at home from open heart surgery, 40 years old, 7 bypasses. Yeah, I know when I said that 7, it's crazy.
Wow.
So I got to read your book. So I've got free time.
Yeah.
At its core, and hold on, audience. Excuse me. Whoa. Passages, A Voyage from War to Peace. That is the name of the book. And we never said it. We just started going in. So as I read this book, I felt like it was a journey towards peace rather than resolution. What does peace mean to you now after everything you've seen?
Well, I mean, if you think of peace at being something that you acquire at the end of a battle, it's peace is healing. Peace is getting to the point where you've analyzed the damage done, both psychologically and physically, and you can move ahead, uh, despite the emotional and physical scars that will remain. Um, Peace is getting back to some normalcy of life where you're not thinking about the challenges every minute. Um, and of course, that can take all kinds of different pictures for different people.
Now, the connection between the veteran and the psychiatrist is quiet and unexpected. What does this kind of relationship reveal about how healing actually happens?
Well, the relationship, I mean, I created this national difference between the American vet and this Greek physician. So the Greek physician, young guy in training, he's just into his psychiatry residency. He really has no connection with Vietnam or any war, except that his grandfather was in World War II. So he has, that kind of idea, but he's sort of a blank slate. And even though he is a foreigner, an international medical graduate, that's kind of an advantage because he's a blank slate in regard to looking at this veterans challenge, and he's young. Um, And the vet is kind of old and hardened in his ways. Uh, he's been dealing with a lot of stress. He puts himself in the forefront of stress, being an electrician who runs a whole, 500, 700 bed hospital. And he's on call 24/7, 365 days a year. So he knows what stress is about, and he knows that there are some things in his life that are not at peace. And so that's what the two work through. And I wrote a story where it takes time for them to relate to each other, and each of them has to give the other one a lot of room because they have to get something from each other. The vet comes in and he knows he needs personal help, and he knows he's gotten his butt in trouble with the law. And, you know, the young psychiatrist in training knows he needs to learn how to operate in this environment with difficult personalities, with substance abuse, and keep his head on at stressful moments. So these these two are transitioning. They're in another passage that they couldn't really predict from the start. So I think if the reader hangs on to the word passages and thinks about all the passages that we go through in life, from being children to becoming adults, interacting with our parents, then how that relationship reverses later in life, where we kind of become the caretakers of our parents, uh, to going from civilian to being in the military. If you haven't been through that transition, it's an eye opener. I tried to show a little bit of that, and how physicians are manufactured, the process, what it's like to be an intern and have a day in the life of an intern working in a big hospital overnight. It's just kind of a madhouse. Um, Tried to get people to get a taste of what those transitions are like, and then step back and think about their own transitions, because I think there's a lot of value. We all go through transitions. We're all going through transitions all the time, from being in practice to being retired from practice, as I am right now. It's a transition. And, you can read a lot about it, but then you only go through it once.
Right.
But it's a very useful reflective exercise to do that, to think about what you learned in one particular transition, what were your challenges and who you were before and who you are at the end of that transition. It's so valuable to reflect in those terms, in terms of being at peace.
Okay. I like that. I like that. Now, one thing we're going to do real quick, and this is totally different. I've never done this on the show. I got to give you something, a quick review, real quick. Thing about your book that is going to draw people in is the perspective. Perspective is part of the thing that you do inside of a literary device to hone in on an area that people don't think about. You could have focused on combat in here a little bit heavy, but you didn't do that. You centered in on what happens, what lingers afterward. And when you do that, that is the greatest thing you can do for someone that can't be there. That type of perspective, you made me feel like I was there. And in doing so, I've got to give you a thumbs up, give yourself a pat on the back later. And if you got a mirror, be like, yeah, I did.
Thank you.
And the reason I want to tell you that is because that is like you were talking about something being manufactured. That something's not manufactured. That's almost like writing charisma, which you did there. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but I figure in my almost 10 years of podcasting and talking to a lot of authors, I don't see it very often. So I do want you to get your flowers for that right now. And that's one thing I would like to encourage to all the listeners. The themes in this book, the way that you present it, it almost feels like you could have done this 30 years ago. And now
Too busy.
right, you're too busy, but imagine
I'm too busy.
30 years ago, it would be option now and they would be movies on HBO and they still can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you, PK Edgewater, for taking the time in life in your second part of your life, because you're just in your second passage now. Taking the time to get out here and to decide, hey, I had a fulfilling life, but my fulfilling life, along with fiction, along with real time heartache, happiness, downturn, downtroddenness. Well, that's not a word, downtrodden. Um, just the whole gamut of emotion. You incorporate it in a book. And it's not very often that you catch 10 lightning bugs at one time. You only catch one and you gotta let the other one see it so they get attracted to go into the jar. And you were able to achieve that. So take that and run with that. Now, before we end the show, I need you to do me a huge favor. Everybody knows where to get the book and all that other stuff, but leave them with the mission statement, the feeling that you got after you finished reading what you wrote.
Wow. Oh, yeah. It's funny. I just finished reading the book again today. It was published the end of last May. And, I've read through parts of it all along, but with this interview coming up, I just sat down starting yesterday and read through it. And I actually enjoyed it. And, I said a lot of what I set out to say, and I think it's said well. I think people who read it will recognize that it's probably a little different from what they've read. It's not genre fiction. There's no superheroes. There's um, nobody with superpowers. It's just human beings that are navigating the world with each other and looking for help and trying to give help. So it'll speak to everyone's heart. Everyone will identify with one or more characters. They'll identify with one or more situations. They'll identify with one or more of the lessons. So I think there's something of value for everyone in this novel, and that's what I came away from my finished reading it about an hour ago, and I think it's still true. So thanks for your kind words. I really
Okay.
appreciate that, JR.
Now, audience, the amazing thing about a podcast is after the podcast is done, and you're done watching the video, if you look up the information, that's the after podcast effect. And those are your show notes. Show notes are an amazing thing that will be able to guide you to PK Edgewater's website, and guide you in different ways to pick up the book via all the channels he spoke about earlier in the shameless plug. And the thing that I always talk about, you can go to your state library if you live close by, and you have to go in person. That's one thing I do know. I am going to get somebody to try it out to see if you can go, just call in. But you can go there with the ISBN from a book. And even if you don't purchase the book at the time, if you just get the ISBN, which I know there are some people out there that have told me in Missouri, yeah, I had to get you guys out there that have done that. You can get that book immortalized and put in every library in every county in that state. Some states have lots of counties. Some are small, like West Virginia, and there's 55 counties, 2 libraries in each county. That's a lot of places. And then the other thing that you can do by purchasing the book and leaving a review, no matter what the review is, because we want the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we all watch Westerns. By doing that, you're letting PK know how he's influenced and how he's motivated you. Maybe his book worked wonders. Maybe his book struck a chord. And if it's a valid reason for it striking a chord, he would like to know that. So he'll know that, man, my book, it's a whole gamut of emotions. Because we want to know the emotions. We want things to stay human and not so Android. And that's not a dig at you Android users. I'm an Apple guy, either way. But it's a point that sometimes it's lost in translation with people. People just think they a small portion of interacting is, oh, I buy the book, leave a review on Amazon. No. Go a little bit further. Go to your library website, leave a review right there too. Those little things push the narrative for the book to go on and have bigger wings after the initial promotion run is done. Because he's writing a second book. So his book has some wings right now, but it don't have big wings yet. And we want it to have those amazing wings. So before the British lady comes on to take over for the outro, I want you all to gauge everything that was said here and realize you have a quality author. And sometimes I get lost in translation because people don't pay attention to the literary devices and everything that goes on with how the person writes. Now, I didn't give him the opportunity to tell you if he used any literary devices, so we're going to stick with the adage that he did, even if he didn't. We don't want that revealed. All right. So on that note,
JR, you're the real deal. Thanks, man.
all right. So on that note, I am JR Sparrow, and he is PK Edgewater, and our famous British lady will take us out of here.
Please follow WV Uncommonplace on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, TikTok, where we have some great content, Facebook, LinkedIn. Hit up the merch store at oncommonplace.square.site. Join the email list from the website, and rate, subscribe, and give feedback from your favorite podcatcher. And lastly, thanks for listening, and tune into the next episode.